Tell me, what was the first car that you owned?
Actually, the first car I got was a gift from my grandfather. It was a Ford.
Yeah.
But the most memorable one for me was the first company car I got, and that was a BMW.
Okay. Very consistent in your choice of cars then? You had BMWs a long time, I guess?
Yes.
What was the most intelligent thing? And how many years ago was it for your first BMW?
Actually, it was 1990, so
Okay.
1990. And at this point of time, the car was very old. It was a diesel car. It was 150,000 mileage, second engine, third gearbox. But the most innovative thing in the car was actually the mobile phone. Because it was one of the first mobile phones. It was that kind of battery. You could carry it around, and I was very proud to have a mobile phone in my car.
It cost more than the car, right? I guess.
You know, when you are very young, and at this time I was beginning of 20s, every friend was so jealous about the BMW and more jealous about the mobile phone.
So imagine yourself back then, 20 years ago. How's the future of transport panned out the way you thought it might?
At this point of time, it was very much important to have economic engine, so less fuel consumption, more sportiness. That was the major point everybody asked us. And today, it's rather the question of connectivity. So how the car is connected to the environment. Do you have an app where you can steer the car, where you can open the car, where you can start the engine, where you see everything you want to see. So it's more integrated gadget in your life. And it's more than just bringing you from A to B. It's part of your entertainment as well.
Okay.
Because you can work there, you can drive long distance being relaxed. You can have your entertainment inside, especially for the kids in the backside.
Olga, you had obviously, when you were starting out, I'm not so much interested in your first car, but I also read somewhere that you also had a gun when you were starting out. Is that true? You don't still have your gun now, do you?
Мы сегодня будем, я представляю, так скажем, новый.
I represent a new generation of BMW company, but what we are doing, so I call it a car, but this is already a robot car.
Извините, скажите, а в зале
Can you hear me what I'm saying? Thank you.
Из-за моего микрофона вы не слышите.
Okay.
And channel.
Channel, thank you. Okay. Volume.
Итак,
Are killing machines. When you've recently pivoted in the past 5-6 years your company into autonomous driving technology, and obviously a very big selling point of this is to stop so many fatalities on the road. Let's try and think into the future. How smart do you think vehicles are going to be, first of all, in perhaps 5 years' time? I want to get an idea about how optimistic you are.
No.
Well, I am certain that we have no options available here. There are simply no alternatives. The time to discuss whether or not we need alternative cars, this time ended 5 years ago.
Случаев worldwide растет в геометрической прогрессии.
Right now we have a lot of fatalities on the roads all over the world. There are literally millions of fatalities every year. And this is caused by increasing population of the world. We have a higher density of population, more cars per capita. Many urban families have 2 cars per family. Also increasing drug use, etc. So I do not want to list all the reasons, but it's essentially a war going on, and 2.1 million persons fall victim every year to traffic accidents, and we have to remove the human factor from this story. Now we have to decide how. The ownership schemes are discussed, whether this will be public transportation or whether individuals will renounce the ownership of their private cars. We have here an esteemed colleague from BMW company, and we can discuss two models here. The American model, when people denounce the ownership of private cars and go to public transportation, and the European model is when people just use the car as they use a robotic advisor, a robotic assistant.
You're going to steal all my questions here, so we'll get to many of those points. But I want to talk about smart mobility and ethics for a bit. And obviously, recently there was a classic study that looked at how people reacted when given a choice of who to run over. You're driving, something happens, do you run over this person or do you run over this person? One of the more disturbing things that I found about the study was that people are far more willing to run over a criminal than they are to run over a dog or a cat. Okay? So I'm going to try a bit of audience participation. Maybe this is suicide, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. Right? Can you all, and there might be a bit of a delay, but can you all put your hands up if you're more willing to run over a criminal than a dog? One person. Two.
Three.
Anyone else?
Four.
Не, много. Почему?
No, we have a lot of them. We have a lot of them.
Don't talk to those people later on. But Stefan, this is a question for you because you work for BMW, you've worked in Thailand, you're working now in Russia. My question is, should car manufacturers alter the autonomous software in their cars depending on where they are selling them?
I think, first of all, it's really a question of legislation and risk management, which is mainly driven by insurance. So the question is, when something is happening, who is responsible for and who is paying for? We are working now in 170 countries all over the world, and we find 170 different kind of rules, regulations, and cultural backgrounds. You mentioned Thailand. When I was in Thailand and standing in front of the traffic jam, I felt alone. And 2 minutes later, I was surrounded by 100 scooters. Yeah, and it was sometimes scary to drive there. You will not find them in Moscow. Yeah, if you are in Munich, you have a lot of bicycles crossing the road, and you always have to be watching out where they are. You will not find them in Moscow. Yeah? So, which means every city, every country is specific, and this needs to be incorporated in technology. And here artificial intelligence helps us to screen the market, to screen the individual situation in the city, and to make the best choice out of it. But the ethic question, the moral question, is rather a question to authorities and to risk management.
Okay, so that's interesting because, and especially in Thailand, so this survey, one of these big surveys found that in Eastern countries, people are far more willing to run over a 20-year-old than they are a 60-year-old, which in the West,
it's vice versa.
It's vice versa. So what you're saying is you would leave it up to the local regulators rather than BMW having to make a choice itself.
First of all, autonomous driving should prevent to run over anybody, be it a dog or be it a person. So it's not the aim of the game. The aim is to avoid accidents and to save life. But of course, there will be situation when an accident, you cannot avoid that there will be an accident. And then, of course, the technology has to ensure that the damage is on the lowest ever possible level. And yes, this needs to be discussed and regulated with the city authorities together, but there will not be a BMW solution and a Mercedes solution. So there will be a technology, and here we are also working in cooperation with other brands, and there will be a legislation in the city, and this has to be integrated and combined.
Okay. Olga, what's your thought on this?
I wanted to mention, because you see, in that regard, we are cross-platform, cross-brand. We work with different brands. And I wanted to give you a few important examples. Let's start with China, not Thailand, China. China is now experimenting with the index of social importance. Do you know what is it? A person is accompanied by a certain record, and in case of a an inevitable traffic accident. If the accident cannot be avoided, the first person to suffer is the person who has the lower social importance index, the lower value of that index. Many countries believe this approach to be too radical, to be even fascist. It's really incomprehensible to some people to sacrifice the life of a person based on some automatic grading on some index. We work with the municipality of the city of New York. There they toughened the laws for cyclists. You know that the cyclists are fined on the same level as the drivers of cars. They want to bring down the stochastic nature, the random nature of movement of bicycles in the roads. Any country we take, we must understand that automated driverless cars, this is a different new paradigm, like when we had horse-driven carriages and people started using cars. Traffic rules changed. Pedestrian lanes appeared. Pedestrians had to look at the traffic lights before crossing the street. The same is true for robotic cars, automated cars, driverless cars. In a flow of driverless cars, the behavior of other stakeholders, other actors, for instance pedestrians, will change. The traffic in the urban area is the story of both the drivers and the pedestrians. And the question, this is the question of the new morals. This is the zone which is called the life-critical application of artificial intelligence, where where AI is determining what basically who lives or dies. The most important person for BMW company is probably the person who purchased the car. And if you buy any, and this is true for any brand of motor cars. So if you want to buy a car,
a succinct answer. I'm interested in, you make the technology, right? You're the one who's making the technology that other people are using, other municipalities, car companies. Do you think that there should be some sort of common standards when it comes to this classic problem about what happens if you run over A or B, or do you think it's up to the government and the car companies?
Я отвечу, а потом, наверное, BMW.
I will answer your question, and then we'll give the floor to the representative of BMW. Right now, there are 6 levels of AI for driverless cars. So the 4th level, AI, is the level that possesses all functions of a human being and can drive the car, but the person has to stay at the wheel. The human driver has to stay at the wheel for those specifically to resolve these legal issues, legal collisions. And level 5 AI, which presently car makers say is unattainable, this is the AI level 5 can take you from one country to another in the same driverless car without changing the software, without changing anything. And I think it will take you 20 years before this happens.
Yeah, I fully agree. So at the moment we are testing the level 3, which is highly automated, but the driver still has to be ready to take over the car. Level 4 is then when you can switch off your brain and just fall asleep and enjoy the ride, not being in the traffic jam or just coming from A to B and using the time. And level 5, which is fully autonomous, driverless car. But the question you raised, who should make the decision? I think it's, again, a question of legislation, how every country will regulate it, and what does it mean for the risk management and for the insurance. Because finally, the technology will be more or less similar in the cars, because they are developed also with different manufacturers together. So you cannot say the technology of company A is better than the technology of company B. So it has to be on the same level. It will be connected with 5G connectivity in the city.
Absolutely.
So there are a lot of data transfer, which is much more than we can see today. But finally, if an accident is unavoidable, then there needs to be a clear regulation, and it will be country by country. It will not be a similar rule all over the world. Maybe it will be a similar rule in Europe, the European Union, maybe one in China, maybe one in the US, but all other countries have to define it themselves, because there will no international rule applying for risk management.
Okay. Let's just move on slightly and talk about the law of unintended consequences, which I think is quite apparent when everyone thought ride-hailing is going to be amazing, ride-sharing, there's going to be less cars. The exact opposite has happened. Ride-hailing just means a lot more cars and a lot more congestion. What are you seeing, Stefan, in terms of the unintended consequences of BMW's vehicles getting smarter?
So I think, first of all, you need to look at the current situation, why we have so many cars on the road. The main reason is because the cars are utilized on a level of 10, maybe 20%. 80% they are unused and standing around. So which means with car sharing or ride sharing, you would have the chance to utilize a single car on a higher level. But in the city center, of course, everything comes together. So and here it's then for me and for OEMs a question of intelligent traffic management. And intelligent traffic management means also it's not only the car. So you have public transport, you have your bicycles, you have your e-scooters, you have ride sharing, whatever you choose. And just this morning we heard that in Madrid they are working on an app where you say, okay, I want to go from A to B, and I'm paying from A to B a certain fee, and the app is recommending me what is the fastest and most convenient way for me to come there, and it could contain out of 4 different types of mobility. So, which means the management of traffic in the cities will reduce the amount of cars. If it's uncontrolled, if it's not managed, then you have the problematic that more cars are on the road.
Okay. Olga, I'll go back to you, and a lot of this really has to do with trust. Right? There's been, every survey I see, it seems to say that people have a very limited trust in autonomous vehicles, but people put themselves in autonomous vehicles all the time, right, without even knowing it, right? So how quickly do you think this change will happen? Because the reason why I think there might be an issue is that, look at planes, for example. Planes use software all the time, no one questions it, but as soon as there's a really big accident, like the Boeing 737, the MAX 8, the industry goes into complete meltdown, no one gets on one of those planes, they all are grounded. If this happened in the car industry, and a mistake happened with a bit of software that my autonomous car used, I'm not going to get in that car the next morning to go on my commute, right? And so it renders the whole industry, it gives a huge crisis to the industry. Like, how are we going to solve that trust issue?
I want to tell you 2 stories here before I ask the audience about trust. One story happened with me in London recently. We called a taxi. So we just called a taxi. I don't remember the operator. So there was a wonderful taxi, and it was driven by a senior citizen who was about 80 years of age. And he had very strong glasses, and he was looking at the road very intently. And myself and my husband were silently praying. And I asked the driver, excuse me, how old are you? And he told me, well, we have a program of support of retirees in the UK. This was really one of the scariest travels we've ever had from Heathrow. We were virtually ready to catch the steering wheel to drive for him. And during the Olympic Games, there were many stories when drivers who worked overtime were falling asleep at the wheel, or drivers who didn't know Moscow very well. They were driving in the wrong direction. So the risk increases quite significantly when you have a traffic management system and you have a driver who is a total unknown for you, totally unpredictable, and you called up this driver and you entrust your life to 30 minutes to this unknown driver. But a robotic driver, a driverless car, will be much more reliable. I'd like to ask you a question. How ready are you to get into a well-tested driverless taxi car. That's actually quite a few hands in the audience. In that regard, the software product that works without glitches, reliably, with high degree of reliability, people trust that software much more than people trust another human being who could have been, for all we know, intoxicated. So the interception of the software of the driverless car by terrorist actors, that's of course a very relevant, very important story, and this must be counteracted given the future of 5G, the cloud, because presently everything is offline. It's difficult to hack a car while it's driving, but if you have your information for your driverless car in the cloud, then it's a problem.
Will be on the road at the same time with non-intelligent cars, and that means even if the car knows exactly what's going around, this let's say not connected car will be still a little bit less known to the autonomous car. But you are totally right. The technology we have in the future will be much more safe than we see today. 1.2 million people are dying in car accidents every year. And of course, we believe with autonomous driving, this can be reduced a lot because the car is able to see something before it's even visible. And of course, the car will be not tired, so there is no falling asleep. And therefore, I also believe that it's more safe having this technology on board. And even if you drive yourself, today already the driving assistant systems help you to be the best driver in the world if it's switched on and if it's used rightly.
And that's a key point. I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit because you two are obviously very keen, especially you, Olga, on the technology behind autonomous driving and its safety. But the point you made there, Stefan, a lot of cars have it's very easy to make a car very safe. You just need to put a speed limit on it. There's a huge spike in road accidents because everyone is texting. It's because we have more technology, right? On my trip here in the airport, I saw every driver pretty much texting. There's no wonder there are so many, fatalities on the roads. And so, do you think we're putting too much effort into trying to solve autonomous cars and not enough effort just doing a simple regulation saying you can't drive above 20 miles an hour because there's a box in your car that stops you from doing it? Are we distracting ourselves by this promise of technology?
Well, first of all, I believe that we will find our common language with BMW, and we started this discussion with you as well, with your corporation. The first and the most in-demand technology of AI level 4 is driving the car in a traffic jam. On average, any person in a megapolis spends at least 2 hours in traffic jams every day. That's 2 hours of our lives. And within these 2 hours, if a driver can avoid looking at the road, the car will be driving itself, and the person will be able to use this time productively. First of all, we'll get back 2 hours of our lives. And second, we will be working just as we were at our home, or we'll be studying, or we'll be playing, for all I know. And second, the movement of cars in a traffic jam will be more uniform. Human drivers tend to change lanes in the traffic jams, and due to these stochastic movements, the traffic jams are up to 40% more severe than they could be if the cars were moving rationally.
Talk to you a bit, Stefan, about it's kind of linked to the trust issue, but the ability for people to let go. Everyone's very keen to get an autonomous car, but are people going to be very keen to stop owning a car? And I kind of think they're two different questions. And a good example is this: recently I got caught speeding. I had to go to a class to teach me to drive safer. It's mandatory in the UK if you get caught speeding. And I was sitting through this class, and the driving instructor, he was teaching a whole room full of people who got caught speeding. And he said, "Does anyone want autonomous cars?" And a few people raised their hand, and he went, "No, I don't want autonomous cars, and none of you should either." And if ever there was a room of people who needed autonomous driving, it was people who got caught speeding, right, like I did. Do you think, how is you as a car company managing expectations about whether people really want to stop owning cars?
So first of all, we believe that individual mobility is still a topic for the next 30, 50 years, and it will not stop because it's a kind of lifestyle, it's a kind of luxury, and you should divide suburban situations and rural situations. In a city center, it's very easy to have public transport, you have organized transport, and it's faster and it's more efficient. But if you're out of the city, it's much more complicated to organize it, and you want to have your individual freedom to drive yourself. The car should help you to be a better driver. The car should help you to avoid accidents, and the car should also give you pleasure while it's possible driving. So the philosophy of BMW is provide the maximum innovation and technology to the customer, to the driver, whenever he needs this, being the best driver in the world, and support this driver and take off the burden of standing in the traffic jam when the driver is in the city. So being able to provide both technologies for both situations, and for sure in the next 30 years, despite we are starting to fly, then the car will be still the major mobility utility beside public transport.
Okay. And Olga, I'll ask you the same question, but slightly different. Who do you think you're going to sell your software to in the next 5 or 10 years? And I ask that because you talked about it earlier about the Chinese state system and how they prioritize citizens. Do you think we could see a situation in 5 or 10 years where I don't have a car, I'm waiting for an autonomous car to pick me up, but that autonomous car is sponsored by Starbucks, and it will prioritize people who buy very big Starbucks every day, and it's not going to prioritize me? Are those the sort of people you're going to sell your software to?
And all generation, and the whole generation, the whole Y generation and Z generation are like you. They do not understand why do they need a driving license. They just want to be driven somewhere. If we talk about the market that we are in now, we are producing the brains, so to say, and we see what is happening in the market for driverless cars. Everybody was yelling that the old players, I do apologize to BMW, that the old brands are fading into the past. This is old school, and new companies will come to the foreground, such as Tesla, Apple, etc., and they will be software driven. Based on that, the software is the foundation to which basically you slap on the wheels. But it turned out to be wrong. This is my statement, and I'm saying this with full confidence, that after this much hyped statement, it turned out during the past 3 years that one of the reasons for which the car making industry is so conservative, the reason for that is that every bolt and every nut must be tested, and there's a culture of producing a well-tested car. It's easier to put on a smart head on an existing vehicle because you have production culture which is not easily destroyed, than the opposite approach where you take a smart head and put and slap the wheels on it like Tesla does, and you will not if you use the first approach, you will be guaranteed against, for instance, car doors being blocked if the car catches fire, if the car goes on fire. Tesla has great engineering culture. They have their interaction between hardware and software is not very well tested yet. This battle will continue for the next 10 years, and my bet is on the old school, on the car manufacturers, because they have a strong experience in producing cars which are very important for human lives. In China, an average car maker produces as many cars as BMW does in a year, but we see there the same issues, the issues of certification, debugging, the issue of engineering culture of production, as we call it. The problem with transportation, the whole story with transportation is that it must be safe first. All other things come next. and safety must be guaranteed by the same players who guaranteed it to us for the past century. Cognitive technologies, our company makes its bet on the old school players.
For joining us, and thank you very much for our audience. And I'll hand over to Tori to close proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.